Breaking news. It's never ordinary at Bet365. 21 plus only. Must be physically located in Virginia. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. T&Cs apply.
On April 11th, Drop is...
Excuse me, I really need your help.
You okay?
a killer thriller.
Someone wants me to kill my Dave.
Why are you doing this?
Why does he have to die?
Experience the movie that has critics and audiences on the edge of their seats.
It's someone in this restaurant.
Pretty hardcore first date.
Yeah.
Drop, only in theaters April 11th. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13.
Welcome to this week's Harness Racing Alumni Show. I'm Freddie Hudson, and I'm here today with Bob Marks and Andy Cohen.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show with your host, Freddie Hudson.
Returning this week, we have Gordon Banks, Clay Horner, and Michael Antoniades. Gentlemen, welcome back to the Harness Racing Alumni Show.
Thank you, Freddie. Thank you, Fred.
Okay. Gordon, now this is a continuation because last week you were in Australia and New Zealand, and you were supposed to lead the show, but you couldn't log on to the show. So this is in your hands. But I also, how did your trip go to Down Under?
Well, I got to start by saying if it's in my hands, we're all in big trouble because I'm not sure where I am right now. I had a great trip. I spent a week in the South Island of New Zealand, which is the best part of New Zealand to be in, and was at Queenstown and Wanaka and all over the South Island. I was hosted by Robert Famularo of Dancing at Moonlight Farm, an old friend for 25 years. We've been friends, and it is an incredible farm. It was beautiful. His family, his wife, gave me an incredible time. They drove us everywhere. And then I had a week in Sydney and climbed the bridge for the second time.
Wow.
And that's, I had forgotten that I was 15 years younger when I climbed it the first time.
Yeah.
It makes a difference. And had a great time. So great trip.
Well, Gordon, I did it 35 years ago, and I thought it was hard then.
Yeah, maybe the bridge is expanding, though.
Well, I don't know. I don't know about that. But my wife, it was actually on our honeymoon, and my wife likes to remind me that we were some of the last people who were able to go up Ayers Rock. But more to the point, she reminds me that halfway up, I didn't think she was keeping up, and I said, "I'm going ahead. I hope you can catch up." And she said, "For the next 45 minutes, Clay, I was really wondering why I was on a honeymoon with a guy like you."
Clay, did you know that you just got lucky?
Exactly. I did say to her, "You know what, dear? It's a lot easier on the way down. You'll be able to keep up."
I can tell you that on the bridge, the way down is, I think, tougher than the way up.
Yeah, I do too.
But it was beautiful. It was a great trip. And as I say, Fred says I'm supposed to lead this, but I really have no idea in what direction. And I didn't even have a chance to listen to last week's show. So I'm going to lead in absence. Clay, you better at least get us started because maybe I'll be able to pick up after that.
Well, I think it would be really interesting to hear you talk about the scene down under and what we can learn from it, and we can contribute in that regard. I think that's a really interesting issue. I think that the whole notion of the future of the business and whether we can capitalize on internationalization is a really important topic, and I say this, and really picking up on my earlier comments. Until 3 or 4 years ago, when I got involved in this little thoroughbred group that turned out to be a lot of fun and luckily very successful, I was just a dyed-in-the-wool North American standardbred guy, and I would watch the Prix d'Amérique, and that's maybe the Elite Lop, and that was my scope of international racing. But between looking and spending more time now in particularly watching Vincennes in the winter with the good races, and some of the other tracks, and now looking at some of the international thoroughbred tracks, I just find it makes the whole thing, when I mean that, being interested in horse racing, so much richer and more interesting. And so, I still, spend obviously most of my time watching North American racing. I find that the variety and, most importantly, given the topic we're talking about, the learning that you get from seeing other things and thinking about how those things would work here. And, I'll just end that with, Bob Marks made a really interesting comment a couple of weeks ago when I made a comment about, the importance of big fields. And Bob chimed in and said, hey, just a second, I don't want too many horses to have to keep track of from a bettor's point of view. And, of course, that the focus on that issue of what do the bettors want and how do we balance that. I know they don't want 8 horses on a half-mile track just because, there's not enough interest in, the actual watching of the races, but the handicapping. But what can we learn internationally that we could try in North America? Saw Meadowlands had a 5/8 mile track, 5/8 mile race like 2 weekends ago, and I thought it was really interesting because they were all out the whole way. I mean, I wouldn't want to watch a steady diet of that, just as I don't want to watch 5 furlong thoroughbred races all the time when I'm watching that. But the notion of what we can learn from each other and then incorporate it into a more interesting package to attract more people is, to me, one of the most important issues.
No, I think so too. I was lucky that when I was younger, I lived 10 years in Europe, and so I had been to the races in Belgium and in France and everywhere. So I saw the variety of racing they have there at an early age, and I've been to almost all the tracks down under. So I was lucky enough for. That's not my phone, I think.
I muted it.
Okay, I was lucky enough to have a pretty broad experience. I think Down Under is ahead of us in almost everything. I had a 4-hour meeting with Brad Steele, who's the head of racing in New Zealand, and he's the right-hand man of Entain. He's put in by Entain, which is formerly Ladbrokes, and they control everything in New Zealand, the TAB, and so they're actually effectuating a policy without much opposition because they have the ability to do that. And what I found really interesting, which I had no idea about, was that already they can bet in race. You can in an automated manner bet on any horse in the course of a race. They obviously have fixed odds racing, which they've had for a long time, and I presume I didn't go into detail about it with him because he agreed to come on the show. So somewhere, I think next week, Brad Steele will be on the show to explain everything himself. But they can bet at any time in the race, and I presume it's fixed odds. And he was telling me he had just been doing that the night before in some thoroughbred racing. They have multi-bets that are incredible. Somebody yesterday just won $200,000 on a 3-race multi-bet that they were commenting about online. Because when I came back from the trip, the first thing I did was watch a favorite of ours in a stake race over in New Zealand lose by a nose, which really was the way to end the trip. That was frustrating, but the racing over there is completely different from ours and much more interesting. I think, Clay, you may have seen, I think I noticed you saw one of the videos I sent from the grass track in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And that was a revelation to me. It changed my opinion about a lot of things because they had over 2,500 people there, which is more than the Meadowlands is going to have on any given night. They had an incredible number of young kids, and they had babies. I guess the laws are somewhat different. They're more relaxed about, age in which one can go. But they had every age. It wasn't just old people. The racing was all on the grass. They had mostly 10 to 14 horse fields. The racing was anything except predictable, at least by my handicapping. And they had the last race I remember well. It was a trot race for 14 from a standing start, and the last half of it was a distance race. I think it was something like between a mile and a quarter and a mile and a half. The last half mile of the race, the last half mile of the race was in a minute, but the mile rate for the whole time was 2 minutes and 10 seconds. And the people couldn't care less. It wouldn't have mattered if it was 1:55. The time was completely irrelevant to the enjoyment people had. The services provided were next to nothing. You had a lot of tents with companies sponsoring it. It was all outdoors. Nobody was in the grandstand. They had the best French fries I've had in my life, but they didn't have a lot of food. They had ice cream but it was just everybody was happy. Everybody was having a good time, and they bet over $1.5 million on that afternoon in a little grass track, cheap races, no big purses, and everybody had a great time. And if you had taken anybody there, they would have wanted to come back. And it just changed my perspective. They have big success with the small tracks, the rural tracks, and like they have big problems with the major tracks, Auckland and Addington, because they're not fun experiences. And that's just a quick summary of it.
Hey, Gordon, Fred here. A real quick question. Now, were all the races from standstill starts, or did they use the gate on any races?
No, they used the gate on most of the races, and they used standing start for many of their trot races. I don't remember top of my head ever seeing, not ever. They have very few standing start pacing races. They have some. Obviously, the New Zealand Cup itself was a standing start, but mostly mobile races.
It's so interesting because one of the things you learn, I used to, like a few years ago, I thought the standing starts in France, I would look at them and I would say, oh my God, that's horrible, it's all messed up. Now that I've watched some of it, I actually quite like it. And the fact is, most of the races get off to fantastic starts, even with 16 horses there. I mean, my recollection of it was always, they get tangled up before they get going, and I know that's some of the case. But maybe the more important point that I'd make, Gordon, after hearing what you've said, and is that one of our great problems right now is that with pari-mutuel racing, except for a very small number of tracks, we don't have big enough pools to give people any confidence in where the odds are going to be. And even more importantly, if we're going to attract young people who are all used to betting on the NFL and other sports, they are used to fixed odds, and secondly, the notion that they can, take a punt at any point during the game on, whatever's being offered as a betting proposition. And so they have two things. One is a young person can bet, and they say, I have confidence that if it's 8-1, I'm getting 8-1, and I'm not going to, get, so to speak, in their mind, cheated at the end of the day. I mean, because they just don't understand the way the process works. And secondly, we know that they love action. And so they love the notion that if I'm out of the game on the results of the game, I can bet on 3 other things now and get my action fill. And as we know, one of the issues we deal with, and the thoroughbreds deal with it too, is There's so much time between races and so much downtime, and so often you look at a race and after the quarter mile you think, I'm pretty confident I have no chance here, and I'm not going to stay interested, as opposed to the notion that I could actually do something else and get a chance. And one of the other things you're mentioning, Entane, Gordon, the son of a very good friend of mine, and they have no history in racing at all, but he was one of the really strong, strategic business consulting firms. And Entane just hired him to be the head of their strategy operation in Canada. And so this is an organization that is hiring the smartest kids to work for them, that can work anywhere for any big company. And to put it bluntly, the talent I'm just talking about this particular guy, but I can extrapolate from that. The talent that they're able to attract to help them with their business is so much greater than the talent that we can attract to help us in similar situations, other than, and then I will shut up, but other than, I thought John Campbell's comment a couple of weeks ago about the guy from Churchill that was helping us now with the timing of races was, oh my gosh, what an unbelievably important guy to have, that, like Gabe Pruitt, thinks about what time you run your races and how you program your races to get the biggest handle. And, again, partly just because so many of the tracks are casino-owned now, they don't really care about that, and it's such an important issue.
No, I think
Michael, did you want to jump in here? This is your expertise.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to all this. The International's quite interesting, and speaking of the International, there was a race Saturday at Châtillon where there was $6 million in the win pool and $5 million in the show pool in one race.
Wow.
So to hear people talk about how nobody loves horse racing is ludicrous. But to come back to the point that Gordon and Clay have made, let's take something more specific. Turfway Park has basically taken over the Knights the last 2 years. Now, how did they do that? First of all, historical racing got them much bigger purses, which got them much bigger fields. And it's not an unusual circumstance to see them have 12-horse fields all night, which generates large pools, big payoffs. I've seen $700,000 multi-race wagers. I've seen $1 million pools there. That was a track that wasn't even on anyone's radar 3 years ago. So they're coming into the night. They don't have to fight Saratoga. They don't have to fight Gulfstream. And they're doing, I believe in March, $366,000 a race, which for nighttime, that's a big number. And it's affected everybody. So that now everybody better know where Turfway's running their race, because if you don't know that, you're done before you even start. But the good part is they brought a lot of money into the nighttime. But the unfortunate part is harness racing just refuses to pivot. They don't understand their product. We talked about 2 weeks ago how 40 years ago they used to run their races every 30 minutes, 9 races. Everybody had the same MO. Then they just started adding races, started adding wagers. I think Sportsman's Park did average between $200,000 and $300,000 on their trifecta. They had one trifecta a night. In the Meadowlands on the weekend, that was between $400,000 and $500,000. Now we have added races. We have trifectas that don't even equal the one trifecta from 30 years ago. So what are the lessons we've learned? Turfway runs a 4-hour card from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock. I think somebody mentioned they're all prime time races. This is the model now. Maybe 6 o'clock to 10:30 is the model, but what we have done is we have added so many races, but now the length of the card is not because of the time in between the races. The length of the card is because you went from 9 races to 14 races. I mean, I don't think anybody thinks a 14-inning baseball game is a real good idea.
No.
And that's what we're trying to do.
You know, what I think one of the problems there is that the industry doesn't really have an identity, sort of akin to what your starting point was on this, because they obviously run all those races because they want to try to help the horsemen. You know, the trainers have the horses get in. But if you're always trying to help a different segment of the industry, sort of like the Meadowlands trying to have cheap races for the freehold people, I understand the idea. I understand the good thought behind it. But you can't make any business succeed unless you're looking at it from a perspective of what do we need to do to succeed, not what do we need to do to make some people happy. And racing doesn't do that. And the consequence is you're producing a product that nobody wants in a way that nobody wants. And that's really sad.
But, Gordon, you see, like every Saturday, Saratoga Thoroughbreds does $20 million. On Whitney Day, they do $35 or $40 million. On Travers Day, they do $50 million. And here you have people saying, they've lost interest in horse racing. I don't see it. Because when it's
there's a difference. You know, you're right. When it's run properly, there's still big interest. But the other thing about the difference in thoroughbred and harness, like when I was watching thoroughbred the other day from Australia, it's a much classier product. And it's the kind of product that makes people want to watch just to see the event and to see the interviews and to see the celebrities and to see people that are well-dressed and good-looking. And when you compare that to how harness is projected and presented, it's a big problem. We don't get the celebrities drawing attraction. We don't. The presenters, Clay, you would have seen the presenters over in Australia the other day, was the woman who was always interviewing everybody with the hat.
Yeah.
You know, she was well-dressed, she was attractive, she was well-spoken, she was quick-witted. The trainers were well-dressed that were interviewed. Harness racing doesn't project an image that's likely to make anyone other than a gambler watch. And that's a problem.
Yeah, well, Gordon, I picked up on that when I was watching Rose Hill, you know, between midnight and 2 a.m. On the weekend. I looked and I said, everybody I see has a sports jacket on. I mean, it was the kind of thing where you looked at and you said, wow, what a classy group of people. I mean, I knew that. I know that, you know, horse racing is, you know, sort of so imbued in the culture in down under. But to watch those races, you look at it and you say, wow, that I understand why you could say to anybody, do you want to come to Rose Hill with me on Saturday? Whether you're a horse person or not, you will like the scene and you will like the atmosphere. It's a little like, you know, my 33-year-old son who went to the Breeders' Cup at Del Mar this year and who, you know, was not interested in racing at all. And he took a friend of his who had never been to the races at all before. And they both, my wife was laughing about this. She goes, Clay, there were two guys in their early 30s who, after having that experience, were asking when they could go next. And I'll say this about my son, who knows nothing about gambling, but bet $50 on our horse, who won the race, and he got $650 back. That to him, and $650 isn't a lot of money to him, but that experience of winning and sort of getting the windfall, which you didn't expect to get, has an addictive, in the good way of addictive, for those of us who are interested in racing, attraction to young people. And we need to be able to give them those experiences more often. And I'm sad to say, because if you said to me, and we'd all say this, 15 or 20 years ago, watching the Meadowlands was a treat. Now I find it hard to watch an ordinary Meadowlands card unless there's a horse that I want to watch, because I look at it and say, okay, yeah, the amateurs are fun because it's unpredictable, but it's not classy, and there just aren't enough good horses racing on the card, except for the great cards in the summer, right? And the other point, and the Meadowlands isn't as bad, But any time you look, and Pocono's my pet object in this sense. Whenever you watch Pocono and you don't see a single person outside, you go and say, what's going on? We really should be running races in some way, and 14 races isn't the right answer. We really should be running races in some way that we can get some people to actually be physically present. Because if new people look at it, unless they are hardcore gamblers, and they see that there's nobody there, they're not going to think that's something that they want to participate in themselves.
And they don't want to take their friends. They want to take people to an event that's going to be fun. And we have to. That's another thing that in New Zealand was one of the things we talked about a lot when I was with Brad Steele. The experience factor of a person at the racetrack is central to their vision of what's necessary to make things better, and that's important. We don't do that.
It's very important. I'll give you a little example that it's just current right now with all the tariff discussion going on. The finance minister of the province of Ontario is a guy that I knew from when I lived in New York, and he was working for the TD Bank in New York, and we, sort of were friends, and we took them to the Meadowlands one night, and I could tell that he and his wife enjoyed the experience. That's 27 years ago. But he called me late last week and said, Clay, I wanted to talk to you about this tariff issue and, what we should be doing from an Ontario point of view. Obviously, our breeders are all up in arms about not being able to sell their horses in the U.S. Yeah. And, the Premier has raised with me, and Woodbine is in the riding of the district of the Premier of Ontario, who's, very prominent in the Canadian discussions about the tariffs. He said the Premier has raised with me whether we should, put the very considerable money that we provide to Woodbine into races for only Canadian-owned and Canadian-foaled horses. Because if we're going to be tariffed by the U.S., why would we put on the Mohawk Million so U.S. owners can take the money home? So, but this is a smart guy who, wasn't taking any ideological position on anything. He was just saying, we've got a public policy issue, and here's really the point. It's apart from the public policy issue, he said, I called you because I had a really good experience going to the races with you in New York when we were both there, and then you and your wife invited us to the Queen's Plate a couple of times, and my wife and I enjoyed that experience. And I'm the finance minister. The Premier actually knows lots of people in the horse business. He's really very big on the horse business. But the finance minister said, Clay, you're the only person I know in the horse business, and so I wanted to call you to talk about that. And, those are the kind of relationships that we need this is just as a result of luck in this case, but are the kind of relationships that we need to have to get our voices heard on the issues that matter and how the government is or isn't going to be prepared to spend money on helping us.
Yeah, and the tariff issue is very confusing because, in fact, a friend of mine asked me to help him buy a horse in Australia last week, and I think the horse is coming over in 10 days on the flight. And even in that limited window, there's no real certainty as to what's going to happen with tariffs on that horse, which is a real problem. And but life has changed so much, Clay. That in-person experience doesn't exist so much anymore. People are just
and of course it's critical in terms of getting long-term public support and interest in the business, and from a public policy point of view, and again coming to the point where people say, I want to go, I enjoy it because I find myself with some like people when I'm there.
Yeah, which is. At that little grass track in New Zealand, there were a lot of important people from within and outside the racing industry. Just a fun event for families and a nice ambiance, You don't get that here. It's just impossible to go on. It's unfair to pick on the Meadowlands. I understand Pocono, but you could go anywhere now except on a major event day, and it's not a pleasurable experience for harness racing racetracks. In the Midwest, I think it might be a little bit different. I almost feel like in the summer going to Ohio and going to some of the fair tracks, because I have a feeling that there it replicates a little bit what I felt in New Zealand. But everywhere else, it doesn't.
Hey, Michael, I saw your hand up.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. I gave Freddie notice I have to drop, but thanks. We'll catch up again.
Okay. Craig. Always a pleasure.
Yes. This is what Gordon talks about is so important for the social component. Mr. Garral built a marvelous facility, and I don't think anybody would be embarrassed to take their wife there for dinner on a Saturday, go to the bar for some drinks. It's beautiful, right? But
yeah, especially the roof bar.
Let's be serious here. That experience isn't attainable in a lot of places. So let's try and talk about the gambling part, what we should be looking at as far as trying to make this sport better. Not spend a lot of time on each topic, but you have to lower the takeout. At least Mr. Garral, he's got a lot of low takeout bets that most of them are very, very popular. Woodbine's tried it. Gabe's great at promoting it. Chris Schick, does 30,000 on the pick 5 and the pick 4 on a little track in Sacramento. So you can do it with low takeout. You need bigger fields too. Of course, that's a little tougher. The sport is way too predictable. You need to stop having these front-end tracks that lead to 320 horses, $6 exactas, $11 tries. If that's what you've got nothing. So you need to work on that. You got too many wagers that nobody supports. The public is look at your chart, look at your results page, and whatever the public doesn't like, get rid of it. You got too many races. There's not enough time in between races. I think free PPs. This is something that a lot of tracks have done. The Meadowlands, I think every track in Canada's got them. Gabe's offering them at Hoosier. This is a big thing. It's great. We need tournaments every week. We need a national bet, like similar to the cross country, or at least on Saturdays. And we need to work on an exchange bet. I know they tried it 10 years ago, but when the exchange bet was popular 20 years ago with Betfair, the commissions, I think, was between 2 and 5%.
When you say exchange bet, you mean you bet a triple and then you turn that ticket in for another?
No.
What do you mean by exchange bet?
Not the exchange bet, the betting exchange that Betfair had 20 years ago.
Oh, okay, I understand.
You like to bet the horse, I like to lay the horse, and it gives you a choice of prices on the exchange, and commission that you pay the winner is between 2 and 5%. I think when they tried it here through TVG, it was 12%. It was just too high. It couldn't work. And I think this is all stuff. And one of the biggest one is international commingling. We have to find a way to get these international people into the pools. I'm not saying we're going to be Hong Kong in 5 years, but it would be a big, big step for us.
They were very successful. They were very successful bringing the French in a few years ago, if I remember correctly.
Yes, the French.
Over Yonkers, right?
Yeah.
Yes, and the French play the races on Hamiltonian Day at the Meadowlands. They have to have trots, and they can only bet on trots, and you have to space the races about 30 minutes apart, and they only bet win and show. But there were days when at Yonkers when those pools were $150,000 a race for Yonkers. At that time that was pretty exceptional. So if that was tried on our bigger races, pari-mutually, I can't even imagine any track could possibly, just by acquiring the French, jump up to be the number 3 track in the country. And of course,
hey, Michael, Fred here. What do you think of these 10-cent, these 20-cent, these 50-cent bets? Would that be better if they moved them up to like $2 or $3 bets?
Freddie, the 10-cent, Balmoral had the first 10-cent wager in horse racing, and the reason we did it was the tax laws were ridiculous in the United States. In other words, I could spend $800 and hit a $650 trifecta, and then the government wanted me to pay them 25% for hitting the $650 trifecta. This went on until 2017. In 2017, the tax laws changed where then all the withholding basically disappeared unless you made an enormous score. So we need to get back at some point to larger denominations. At Santa Anita, you're seeing a $3 pick three. You're seeing a $3 double. You're seeing, I think maybe you're seeing a $5 double. Chris is trying the $3 pick three out in California. Yes, the answer to your question is yes. We need to get back to wagers that are larger. But here's the thing: if you've got 16 races and you're going to start with a $2 pick five, and you're going to follow 2 races with a $2 pick four, how are these people supposed to last?
Yeah, you're churning money. You're churning everybody's money, and there are too many options, without a doubt. I don't remember if you were listening to the show a couple weeks ago. Mark Hanover was on, my cousin. He was commenting along the same lines, which is we're offering far too many bets. You have to focus, and you have to create big pools, and by limiting and using your wagering opportunity and menu properly, and we're just not doing it. I agree with you completely.
Now, there's a man that understands.
Okay.
Because he agrees with you?
Gentlemen, I just want to thank Michael and Gordon for coming on. And Clay, he's gone already. But I just want to really thank you guys. I think it's a great show. I think we got a pretty good message out there. Now, over to Andy.
Thanks, Freddie. I'm going to do a little bit of a return to that conflict between the USTA and Diamond Creek. I'm going to include a little bit more of that in next Monday's Keeping Pace column at Pollock Report. I'm also going to talk a little bit more about tariffs. I wrote about tariffs this past week, and there was quite a reaction to the story. I thought the big story involving the USTA and that investigative committee would be over by now, but there are still allegations and questions being raised about it. So, again, I'll try to get into that. Back to you, Fred.
Thank you, Andy. That's a wrap for this week's show. Please join us again next week.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show